Good morning. It's Jonathan here again. Today is Saturday, the 10th of April, and today's text is from Romans 15, verse 30, through to Romans 16, verse 7. And it's really in two parts. The first part finishes yesterday's reading, which was about Paul's plans. As I spoke to you will have heard, he was writing this letter in Corinth, which is in Greece today, and he is planning to head to Jerusalem. He goes to Jerusalem via Macedonia and Turkey, and the reason he's going is to take an offering from the Gentile churches to the Jewish churches in Judea. But after this, he is hoping to go to Spain, and he's going to Spain via Rome. So he wants to go to Rome to meet the church there, and he hopes that they will then help equip him to go to Spain, because his heart is to preach the good news where it has not been heard before. And so in order to facilitate that, he sends his letter ahead, and he sends it with Phoebe, who we'll hear about in a minute, so that they get the letter before he arrives. But also in this passage, in the letter, he asks them to pray for him. He asks them to pray because he is in a struggle. He says, "Pray that I may be kept safe from the unbelievers in Judea, and that the contribution I take to Jerusalem may be favorably received by the Lord's people there, so that I may come to you with joy by God's will." So as we heard a few months ago when we were looking at the text in Acts, on the way to Jerusalem, Paul received several prophetic words warning him that trouble was ahead, and perhaps he already had a sense of it even before he set out on this journey. Of course, he asked people to pray, and one question we can ask ourselves is, well, were these prayers answered? So on the one hand, you might say, well, hang on, he wasn't kept safe because he got attacked by a mob. He ended up getting arrested, he locked up. He wasn't able to travel on to Rome and to Spain as he hoped. He was in prison for 2 years. Then when he did get traveling, he got shipwrecked and bitten by a snake, which should have killed him. But anyway, so you might say it wasn't really quite what he was expecting. But on the other hand, you could also say that despite being attacked by a mob, God preserved his life, despite the fact that there was then a plot by 40 people to kill him. His nephew just coincidentally happened to overhear about the plot and coincidentally managed to get through to see Paul, and the centurion in charge actually believed him, and he was then escorted out of Jerusalem to save his life. And of course, after the shipwreck, he still survived, and even after being bitten by a poisonous snake, he survived, so that eventually, even though he arrived in Rome 2.5 years late, he still arrived with joy, and the believers were very happy to see him, and he had great fellowship with them. And so, so often when we pray, we want to see answers quick, don't we? And sometimes we want to see answers without having to struggle too much ourselves. Perhaps Paul struggled more than he hoped, but God's purposes were not thwarted, and God was with him as he worked them out. So just turning to the second part at the beginning of Romans 16, we see this list of people, and sometimes you can look at a list and think, well, so what? But it says so much about Paul and about these people. It starts off talking about Phoebe, who was a deacon in the church at Cenchrea. She was a benefactor. Paul commends her to the church for all she's done for the church. He then talks about Priscilla and Aquila. Of course, they were the couple who he worked with in Ephesus, and working alongside them was able to plant many churches around, not just in Ephesus, but around the region. And then perhaps because he's thinking about them, he thinks of Epanetus, who was the first believer there. And then also Mary and Andronicus and Junia, who have been in prison with him and were believers from even before he was. So that goes back more than 20 years. So we see a couple of interesting things here. First, 4 out of the 7 people first mentioned are women. So Paul was obviously working very much both with women and with men. Also, these are people he's worked closely with and been through trials with, and over a long period of time. And we often think of Paul as a lone ranger who went traveling around, but that is not what he was at all. He was absolutely committed to working together with others. And I'm sure there were times when he encouraged them when they were discouraged, and there were times when they encouraged him as well. He could not have done what he did without them. And so as we think about ourselves and what God's calling us to, we are called to work with others as part of his body. And we should be thankful for those who God has called us to work alongside. So bless you all, and may the Lord be with you as you seek to work out his purposes.